Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for another exciting webinar around data. All of us here love data and want to talk about data. And today we have a very special topic. Stop your data from becoming a liability. 3 simple ways to make it an asset. So I'm Cuong Lee. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Data Dynamics. And I'm joined today by a very distinguished guest, Luis Gutierrez. He's our Chief Operating Officer. Let me tell you a little bit about Luis. He's worked for Boeing for 30 years, running infrastructure globally and managed $1 billion in yearly budget, which included all infrastructure costs, software, and services costs for the company. He spent 7 years in the finance industry working for Deutsche Bank as CIO of global infrastructure. He managed well over $1.5 billion in IT costs. He's a very experienced in large-scale contracts, enterprises, outsourcing, insourcing, all those types of situations that you can imagine when it comes down to IT. And Luis has seen it all. Luis, welcome so much to the webinar.
Thank you, Cuong. Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to share our experiences and thoughts with everybody on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, you're in for a wonderful treat. Luis has a wealth of experience to share. To start off with, one of the things that we've been hearing from our customers is that data is increasingly becoming a liability. It's been a challenge for many of them. And there's a number of different sets of challenges or issues. I was actually shocked when we looked at some of this data. I was looking at this and I'm like, I think we all know that the growth of unstructured data has just been explosive. We all see this with sensors out there grabbing data and bringing it into the environment, data about customers, data about systems, telemetrics, a number of different types of things. And all companies have talked about how data should be something that creates an asset and a value, but really it's been creating a lot of challenges in terms of the growth of it. And then being able to sift through it and be able to find things, or being able to make use of that. And so there's a lot of value here in terms of being able to address this. But Luis, how did you react when you saw this information? What some of your experience tells you about the challenges of data and data being a liability?
Yes, absolutely, Cuong. I mean, the reality is when we talk to really large corporations, whatever industry you're in, data continues to grow year over year. And our general thought process is we try to just maintain the data on spinning disks and just try to do our best to manage it. The reality is that it goes unmanaged and it goes untethered, if you will. And so I think these stats are definitely what I have seen across my experiences, not only the companies I work for, but the peer companies when I talk to my peer group across the board, across the industry. I think it's essential where we're at today, where we got 40, 50, 60 petabytes of data sitting out there, for which most people don't know what it is and what it represents and how to effectively manage it going forward. So these definitely resonate with me and what I have seen in the industry for sure. And the cost for these, although we think the cost for storage continues to go down, the reality is the hardware costs continue to go down, but our data center space, the services they're bound with it continue to go up, and thus creates a challenge from a cost perspective. If it goes untethered, it goes unmanaged, the cost will continue to go up for these companies. So I think managing this data and know what we have and make it effective is really the best way to go.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, you were talking about cost and you were talking about growth of data. So are the budgets keeping in line with all the data growth?
Well, absolutely not. Usually the budgets are going down year over year. And so it becomes a challenge. I know for most companies, for most people that are on this call today, they understand what those challenges are. And it gets to be really, really difficult where you're trying to figure out how do you manage a stable budget or even a reduced budget from year to year, but yet your storage costs continue to grow. And one way of doing that is to be able to manage the data, determine what you need to have online, what can be archived, or even what's been duplicated across the board that you only need one version of versus 20, 30, 40 versions of the exact same file. And I think managing that information, managing that data becomes key to the overall cost effectiveness of the infrastructure.
Now, Luis, you have so much experience. You've been in the bowels of a lot of really big IT environments and situations. What is like the biggest set of war stories you have around data that created a risk to the enterprise, whether it was audit or anything else, right? What are some examples where data became a liability well beyond the cost?
Well, I tell you, as you know, when we're managing data, you have to replicate it to take care of a DR, disaster recovery environment. The biggest issue we had at one point was the data replication was not set up correctly. And so we thought everything was being replicated into the DR environment. And one time we did encounter a problem where we had to reverse back from the DR and start running our systems over on the DR side. And guess what, Cuong? Most of the data did not get replicated, did not get copied. And thus created a significant audit issue, significant regulation issue that forced us to recycle, if you will, and try to replicate the data from its original sets of backup. Now, when we're talking about 40, 50 petabytes of backup that we need to restore, can you imagine how many days that was going to take in order to do that? So obviously, the more the data we have to manage and the more that we have to incorporate into the day-to-day management of that infrastructure becomes critical. And it's just one other area that could go wrong for us. So trying to limit it and trying to manage it and trying to understand what's there is key, because half the battle of that restore was trying to determine what was the original content and where can it be restored to. And not to mention the time it was going to take to do it.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect of this too, right? It's that we've discovered in so many customer environments, because no one really knows what all this data is. They make it shared with everyone because it's just so much easier sharing data with everyone. And some of the craziest things I've seen is customers would have sales reps many times don't like to use CRM systems, and they would download customer contact information, telephone numbers, credit card information. They would put it in a spreadsheet and they would share it with everyone to use that instead of CRM. Or examples where users might put their passwords in clean text and then they put it into a share. So what are the types of liabilities or challenges that happens with when you see those types of things happening?
Well, absolutely. PII data becomes key, right? Not to mention the password situation that you alluded to in the example. But regardless of which industry you're looking at, files with PII information do get replicated, do get stored out there. And if we don't know that information exists in the open and clear, it becomes an issue. And it becomes something that needs to be addressed. And the liability to the companies are huge. We've seen some of the fees that the companies have had to pay to either resolve a regulatory requirement or regulatory exposure, or even lawsuits from companies that got exposed with information in the clear. So
yeah, it could be quite large, right? Like 4% of gross revenue. I mean, it's some of these fines can be quite large and very impactful. But also the threat of cybersecurity, and threats from inside attacks and all of that.
Absolutely right, Cuong. And it's unfortunate that some of these companies literally have to put in their forward forecast liability payments because they know that the amount of data that we have on a year-to-year basis, something's going to happen, and it's unfortunate. So we need to help our customers get beyond that risk and manage this information and be able to know what's out there, what's at risk at least. Gives you a heads up on how to manage it and how to try to avoid these fines in the future.
Excellent. Now to the fun part. It's all around. All companies have been talking about ever since the economists came up with data is new oil. All companies are looking at how do I take the data I have in my environment and turn it into an asset, and what it means to the company. I mean, there's a lot of information here around the value that you have, with your data, and how you can become a leader with ensuring that you're using your data in the right ways. So, when you see this, Luis, how do you react to it? What are things that you've seen in your experience on examples of where really leveraging your data makes a difference for your company?
once again, a lot of the data, since we don't know it exists, gets recreated, and many times from scratch, right? If you think about how many presentations people put together on the same topic, and when there's a plethora of information already sitting out there that would allow an individual or an organization to be able to tap into and say, okay, we have a lot of this data out there. Let's use it. Let's bring it up to date and be able to consume it for our customers or regulators or whatever the use case might be. I think it's important that the second bullet there, we're a data-driven organization, are 23 times more likely to acquire customers, 6 times as likely to retain customers, and 19 times as likely to be profitable, is something that I resonate quite a bit, because when customers were coming to us for information, for data, the quicker we can turn that around meant revenue, meant effectiveness, and more importantly, meant credibility. If we could determine the data that was out there and be able to siphon out the information you needed and turn it around in a quick time frame, it was absolutely essential for the credibility that we have with customers and how we expect to manage the conversations moving forward. So
Yeah,
it definitely hits the bottom line, Cuong. It definitely hits the bottom line.
yeah, absolutely. And I see stories like this across all the different industries where so many companies now are data dependent, and it's your ability to be able to extract value from your data. But now you have all these data lakes out there that are actually really more data swamps, because people are trying to share that data. It's like, if you're able to catalog it, you're able to categorize it, you're able to find it, you're able to make it accessible for your AI machine learning applications. You're able to extract what's valuable to it, but not make another copy of that data, continuously and doing all these ETLs all day long. It's about leveraging the data in place and being able to get that value and be able to get it to where you need to get it, to have that extraction of value, whether it's determining in oil and gas, what are the best locations, for drilling, or whether it's in financial services, credit ratings, or whether it's in genomics and just really, doing research. So quite a bit of areas here. So, that I think that definitely makes a lot of sense.
One more quick comment on that, right? I mean, we know when we use our social media platforms, when we're using the web for whatever reason, that information and data gets captured about what we're looking at, how long we're there, what clicks we're clicking. That information becomes absolutely essential data that these companies use to continue to manage and evolve their business and their business models, right? And I think that is a perfect example of what we're talking about. A lot of our electric vehicles, new vehicles that are going on right now are basically telling a central platform how you drive, how effectively you drive, how fast you're going, what's your average speed. All of that is information that becomes critical for the company to continue to evolve their products and continue to manage their data going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in the data that a company can learn from. So I think we all understand some of the challenges with data and liabilities. I think we all understand, how it can become an asset. But why has it been so difficult for enterprises to be able to manage their data or to valorize it? What are some of the key things? And we have here 6 items that we have seen in surveys and talking with customers. What have you seen, Luis, in your experience? What are some of the things that ring most true to you?
We talked a little bit about it already, but both from an infrastructure perspective, being able to manage the data and not let it grow to basically an unmanageable state is key. But the valorization of the data is evident when we understand what we have, we understand how to manage it, and we understand how to consume it, not only for ourselves but for our customers. And you mentioned already the data is the new oil, right? And we have a lot of it everywhere. If you think how much is being digitized today, where we came from in the early stages of IT, where basically everything was being printed. And now everything is managed electronically, no matter what you do. I think that value is absolutely key. And the once you have the information in front of you, you can determine how do you monetize it, right? If you don't have it in front of you, you can't monetize. So it's a catch-22, right, Cuong? I mean, you have an asset there. You need to be able to monetize that asset. And I think the industry is getting to that point now that they understand that data is an asset that we need to manage. And the more we know about what we have, the better it is for us to be able to manage it and monetize it going forward.
Yeah, I find that, many times, from a C-suite perspective, this all makes sense. One of the challenges I've seen is that with data, there's all these different silos, all these different lines of businesses. There is the head of infrastructure who just wants to store it and then back it up and those types of things and make sure it's available. There's the chief risk officer or chief privacy officer who wants to make sure it doesn't put me into any trouble. There's the chief data officer who wants to make sure I govern this and I maintain compliance. And then there's chief data scientist or the data scientist who say, hey, this data is from me. Let me try to get the most value out of it. And it's real interesting is that because the data is so large and there's such a lack of visibility and knowledge of the data, and then you have all these different groups looking at the data in different perspectives, that they're not approaching this, together or really looking at how this all fits. So I'm just looking at our poll here. So if you haven't responded to the poll, please do. So 75% of you have said that the biggest challenge that you see is lack of visibility into the data and what you can do with it. So I think that's one of the real key issues. The second top issue that everyone's mentioning here, it's, they're saying the data is not a challenge for them. So, I'd love to get your name and number. Please let me know how you solve it, and then we can help other customers with that. So thank you so much for responding to the poll. Oh, I just got another one here. Where the new second ranked. Oh, all right. You know what? I think now it's a recount.
Yeah, we got to give people time to vote.
I got to give people time to vote. All right. Okay. So now I have a new number one, new 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. So the top issue remains lack of visibility. The next is that data is growing too fast. And then after that, just being able to find the right tool to apply analytics and to identify data types was important. So thanks for that feedback. But I think this reinforces some of the things that you all are hearing and seeing. Is there any thoughts on that, Luis?
Yeah, the second one is really interesting, Cuong. 22% of you are saying the data growth too fast and getting too expensive to store. And I think that, in my experience, that's what most people do not take into consideration. They always think about data as, it's just the cost of storage, and the cost of storage goes down every year. The reality is that you're still housing in the data center. Most of you are going to a cloud. You're going to be paying for that storage in the cloud no matter what. And then the maintenance and management of it and the risk of managing of it is a cost that gets often forgotten in the cost profiles. But that's an absolute good feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a 3-pronged approach to turn your data into an asset. We talked about all the data sprawl, all the optimization, all those type of things, and what the business needs are, and then where some of the challenges. A couple of examples, Luis, that you want to talk through in terms of how you can approach this, and the needs and the challenges, and an approach in terms of turning data into an asset.
Well, again, I know we're going to sound repetitive, but the first thing is understanding what data you have, and where it is, and where is it located, and what type of data is it, and what kind of information can be garnered from it. I think it begins with that discovery component, right? I think once you have determined how much data you have, for instance, things like when was the last time you accessed those files, right? Are typically, what I experienced is that 75 to 80% of the files haven't been accessed in the last 2 years, okay? And yet we also have about maybe 5 to 6% of the files were accessed every single day. Right. So if you have to understand that if that data is being accessed every single day, there must be some value to it, right? And therefore garner some information from that. The data that's stale and has been just sitting around and spinning disks for a long time, you have to wonder why you're still keeping it, right? And why do you need it? And nobody's looking at it, nobody's modifying it, nobody's consuming it in any way, shape, or form. So it begins with just understanding what you have and then making a disposition for each one. Because I know many companies deal with data differently. Some of it may be of value. In many of these larger companies, you're probably regulated to keep data forever. But there's ways to keep it forever in an effective way that you can easily retrieve it, easily get it back. And there's ways that most people are doing today, which is unfortunate, which is keep it on the spinning disk and then hopefully we'll get to it when we need to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some key highlights here is really, when you think about the business, what it really needs to be able to do is how do I manage the life cycle of data? Because that's not even thought about, today in many environments. It just becomes a ever accumulating swamp of data. And so it's around how do I organize it? How do I manage it effectively? But then how do I make sure I work across all the different functions and make sure that works? And most importantly, I want to get to a point where I'm doing data sharing and I'm protecting customer privacy while I'm doing the data sharing, and then really driving that message home about citizen data scientists, data democratization, and all of that. But everything in IT works against it, right? I mean, like all the challenges you talked about growth, that works against it. And the fact that the data is sprawling and no one really knows about it, that works against it. So these are all challenges. So now let's go into the solution. So the three-pronged approach, I think, first, it's really to identify the data. I mean, you can't solve the problem if you don't know what the problem is, and you don't know the extent of the problem. So first is you really have to discover and understand, and then be able to work with that. The next, you have to be able to analyze that data, really go through it, understand what that is, be able to draw insights around it. And this is everything from understanding what type of data it is, the metadata behind it, going into the contents, identifying if there's any sensitive data or PII data. Also be able to do things such as, are there any interesting data that data scientists would be interested in, or any other key aspects behind that. And then you'd be able to take actions on it, being things such as very simply, remediating any type of challenges or risk, or driving data lifecycle management with capabilities of doing archive and intelligent data placement, and really driving things from a policy and automation perspective. So Luis, kind of looking at this approach, the pragmatics and applicability about it, what are some of your thoughts, and what have you seen with some of the customers that you've engaged with, where they've seen the value of this?
Definitely. I mean, one of the key things, obviously, is sometimes we have a tendency of thinking that we archive the data and we forget all about it, right? Because there is a lot of archived data that you may need to get to at some point. And having a really clear visibility of what's out there and what's been dispositioned and what's been managed is absolutely key. Because oftentimes, in my experience and what I've been talking to my peer groups across the industry, restoring old data becomes a huge challenge. Because first of all, you don't know where it is. Secondly, you're not sure how current it is, and you don't have a lot of information about it. I think, just like we manage the data that is live, I think managing the archival or the backup data is just as important. And I think the reality is that the file security aspect of it, the PII aspects of it, becomes a critical issue for some of these companies. Even though you may have archived something, you may still have a risk there. Someone hacks into the environment and get a hold of a lot of files that are critical to you. It becomes a problem when you don't know what you have out there if something was exposed. So the biggest challenge we have is in this world right now is securing our data, securing our environment, and knowing what we have so we can manage it effectively on the way forward.
Yeah, and then be able to valorize it, assign value to it, and then be able to manage it appropriately. I mean, I think this is very simple and pragmatic. Is just three things. That's all you have to do. Now, in order to do those three things, I think we all understand an enterprise is very complex. But what we've seen is these are some examples of the business outcomes we've seen when people have effectively implemented this approach, right? This increases the productivity of your teams, improves the ROI of your entire environment, really helps drive towards data democratization. Some thoughts from you, Luis, in terms of these numbers and in terms of the type of return that you've seen from customers that are able to achieve this.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to the 100% ROI in data center and storage migration because I've been involved with multiple data center migration activities where we're shutting down data centers and consolidating them, and definitely the ROI was very evident in the end result. The migration to cloud also very, very typical and very clear that gets us the percentages that we want. Everybody's going to cloud. There's a lot of migrations to cloud, but migrating to cloud is the key, right? Because I think knowing what you have and how to effectively manage it once it's there becomes a clear asset.
Yeah,
the aspect of it is just really knowing the data, knowing how to manage it. Requires less people to manage it, less resources across the board. And I think the productivity definitely is key.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen situations from a risk management perspective, risk mitigation. We've seen fines go down by 90-something%, yes. By hundreds of millions of dollars because of just having the process of actually going and working through this. So, real significant, business value, around that. And so, right now, what we need and what the industry needs is a sustainable methodology to consistently manage the data and extract maximum insights. And this is like, when you think about this approach, what you want to do is you want to have a platform or a technology, a partner that first helps you unlock data-driven insights. So it's around how do we help you understand your data, get knowledge, extract knowledge about your data, be able to classify it, categorize it, index it. The next is you got to protect yourself. So how do you help secure your data and ensure compliance? And this is one of the real basic things that Data Dynamics helps customers with, is that we can help you identify the levels of risk in your environment, help you be able to remediate that, and make sure that you have a process to govern your data effectively. Then, there's always a need to be able to do data migrations, data movements, data tiering, whatever you want to call it. But whether it's to the cloud, whether it's data center consolidations, whether it's technology refreshes, all of that, you want to make sure that you're treating that data appropriately. Like you don't want to take very sensitive data and then placing it in a public environment on the cloud that everyone has access to. That would just create a significant risk to the business. So once you have all this understanding, we can help you get the data where you need to, where you're confident. But the really key thing you want to be able to do is continuously augment your data. And what that means is to understand your data, curate your data, and continue to be able to discover new insights about it. There may be something that, like in your environment, your AI or machine learning is learning things about certain data. Well, how do we add that, to your catalog? How do we add that to your environment so you can quickly find and search through that? And so what I want to do as call to action is you can certainly get in touch with us. We'll help you. You can email me. My email is right here. In the interest of time, I know that we're running low on time as Luis and I were talking for the whole half an hour webinar. I'm respectful of for all of that. Let me see if there's a question here. Are there any questions? You go ahead and put it in your chat right now. Okay, I think there's a lot of questions around IT costs and how do we drive down IT costs by taking steps in terms of archiving data. So, Luis, you want to share any real world examples here of how archive really saves money?
Yeah, absolutely. When you do the archive, you're saving money by the fact that you're going to a cheaper storage, whether it's lower cost drives or even tape in many cases, right? And I think being able to do that takes away from having to continue to grow the spinning disk environments in the real life production. That's very basic. But I want to stress the fact that once you archive it, you still need to know what you have and how to get to it, because oftentimes when you don't, eventually someone needs it, and
Yep.
if you get to it, it's a big problem.
Well, there's a multiplicative impact as well. Oof, wow, try saying that fast.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, like, the data that you archive, you no longer need to make backups of. And the backups you were making was, you probably did daily backups of it potentially, right? So you could have 365 backups over a year. You're probably having DR of that exact same environment. And more importantly, you had to plan for disaster recovery restores, which means that you have to have an environment large enough to handle all that within your recovery time objectives, right? So there's a lot of cost behind that, and I see there's a lot more questions coming in. So because we're above the time here for the webinar, I'm respectful of your time. I want to thank you all for attending. We will respond back to all of your questions and inquiries over email. So we will get back to you on that. So everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining Luis and I today, and another exciting podcast or webinar regarding data. So look forward to talking to you again soon in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.